The air in the mahogany-paneled office feels thinner than usual tonight. Outside, the city hums, a distant, indifferent beast. Inside, the silence presses in, thick and suffocating. It's the kind of silence that comes after a bomb has gone off, but before the dust settles, before the screams start. My hands, steady until a moment ago, now tremble slightly as I trace the engraved nameplate on the desk, his nameplate. Cold metal under my fingertip, just like the truth that's finally frozen solid in my gut. Across from me, the man from the bank maintains a posture of polite, grim professionalism, his eyes flicking between me and the leather folder on the desk. Inside that folder is the legal documentation, the final, irrevocable proof. The paper trail. More powerful than any emotion, colder than any betrayal. I hear a sound then from down the hall. A shout. Sharp, disbelieving, escalating quickly into a roar of pure, unadulterated rage. It's him. He's just found out. The sound is ugly, primal, the sound of a world cracking apart. My world cracked first. His is just catching up. The sound vibrates through the expensive walls, through the floorboards, right into my bones. It should feel like victory. It feels precise, like the snap of a well-set trap. If this story resonates with you, if you've ever felt the ground give way beneath your feet, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. And if you haven't already, please subscribe. It helps me more than you know. Before the shouting, before the cold metal of the nameplate, before the man from the bank, there was the hum. The steady, comforting hum of my life, built brick by careful brick. My business. It wasn't just a business. It was the marrow of my identity, the tangible proof of years of grinding effort, sleepless nights, and calculated risks that paid off. It was a marketing and creative agency, small enough to feel personal, large enough to command respect and significant contracts. I built it from the ground up, starting in a cramped spare room, powered by stale coffee and an unshakable belief in what I could create. Every client win felt like climbing a mountain, every successful campaign a flag planted on the summit. The energy of the office, the buzz of the team, the satisfying click of ideas falling into place, that was my oxygen. It gave my life structure, purpose, a deep well of quiet pride. My marriage to him, it was the foundation I thought the business rested on. Or maybe the other way around. We'd been together for 15 years, married for 10. He was charming, successful in his own right, a high-flying executive in a different, more traditional industry. We had the comfortable life. The beautiful house in the good neighborhood, the intertwined social circles, the easy rhythm of shared routines. Dinners together, quiet evenings on the couch, the effortless shorthand of a long relationship. There was trust, or what I believed was trust. I shared everything with him. My business triumphs, my anxieties, the financial details, the legal structure. He was my confidant, my partner. I signed documents without reading every single line, not out of carelessness, but out of absolute faith. He handled some of the financial paperwork for our joint accounts, for the mortgage on our home, for investments. He was good with numbers, meticulous. It felt like a partnership. Two lives woven together, supporting each other, building a shared future. My desire? Simple. To keep building, to keep growing, both the business and our life together. Security, success, shared happiness. That was the picture I lived in. Bright, stable, predictable. A little boring, maybe in the best possible way. The crack in the picture started small, a hairline fracture I barely noticed at first. A few late nights he worked became more frequent. Vague explanations about demanding clients. Then a shift in his demeanor. A guardedness I hadn't seen before. A quickness to irritation, a tension in his shoulders even when he was trying to relax. My questions were met with deflection, or worse, a weary sigh that made me feel like a burden. I rationalized it. Stress from his job, a difficult period. I tried to be supportive, to give him space. My focus remained on my work, pouring my energy into the business, when the atmosphere at home felt cooler, distant. The inciting incident, the moment the picture shattered completely, came not with a bang, but with a misplaced envelope. It was a Tuesday. A mundane Tuesday. I was working late at the office, needed a specific file for my home office. He was supposedly working late too. I let myself in, the house silent. I went to his desk, a place I rarely intruded on. He was pathologically tidy. Except this time. A single envelope lay on top of a stack of papers, slightly askew. It wasn't a business envelope I recognized. It was plain bulky. Curiosity, a tiny, unwelcome worm, made me pick it up. It was addressed to him, from a local law firm I'd never heard of. Inside wasn't a letter. It was a thick bundle of documents. Legal papers. My name was on one of the first pages. Not my personal name. My business name. The words blurred at first. Mortgages. Guarantees. Collateral. Names I didn't recognize. Another woman's name. An address I didn't know. My brain struggled to process the technical jargon, flipping pages frantically. And then I saw it. My business, my agency, listed as the corporate guarantor for a residential mortgage. A mortgage on a property I had no knowledge of, for a person I had never met. The amount was substantial. The date on the document was 6 months prior. 6 months of me living my life, running my business, while he had quietly, deliberately put it on the line for whom? The other name on the mortgage applicant line wasn't his. It was hers. His mistress. The air left my lungs in a rush. Not shock, not yet. Just a profound, physical emptiness. As if my insides had been scooped out. The documents rustled like dry leaves in my shaking hands. He hadn't just cheated on me. He had taken the one thing I had built entirely myself, the thing that represented my independence and my future, and used it as a bargaining chip in his sordid double life. He had signed my business away. Or, at least, the security of it. The foundation I thought was solid turned out to be quicksand. The silence of the house became oppressive. Every tick of the grandfather clock in the hall sounded like a hammer blow. I sat there, surrounded by the evidence of his betrayal, in the life we had built together, a life that was now a grotesque lie. The meticulous tidiness of his office, usually a source of quiet amusement, now felt sinister. Every framed photo of us, every shared object, was tainted. He hadn't just cheated on me with another woman, he had cheated on me with my own life's work. He had poisoned the well. My first attempts to grapple with the reality were clumsy, fueled by a desperate need for things to make sense. I didn't confront him immediately. The shock was too profound, the documents too complex. I took photos of everything, hiding the originals back exactly where I found them. My hands were steady again now, but with a different kind of stillness, the eerie calm of someone in the eye of a storm. The next day was a blur. I went to the office, a mask firmly in place. I sat in meetings, signed checks, pretended everything was normal while my mind reeled. After work, I drove to the address on the mortgage document. It was a small, charming house in a different part of town, a neighborhood I didn't frequent. Lights were on. A car was parked in the driveway. His car. My stomach twisted. He wasn't working late. He was here. Building a life, a future, guaranteed by my hard work. The sheer audacity of it took my breath away. I spent the next few days in a state of controlled panic. I pored over the documents, deciphering the legal jargon, cross-referencing names, dates, addresses. I spoke to a lawyer, vaguely at first, framing it as a hypothetical about corporate guarantees and spousal consent, testing the waters. The lawyer's responses were guarded but confirmed my worst fears. A corporate guarantee tied the business's assets directly to the debt. If the primary borrower defaulted, the bank could come after my agency. My agency. The one thing I had built for security. The early struggles were internal. The fight between the woman who loved him, who believed in the life they had, and the businesswoman who saw everything she had worked for dangling precariously over an abyss he had dug. The betrayal was a physical ache, a constant pressure behind my eyes, a knot in my chest that made it hard to breathe. Sleep was impossible. My mind replayed every moment of the past 6 months, looking for signs, for clues I had missed. They were everywhere, suddenly, screamingly obvious in retrospect. The secret of phone calls, the sudden trips, the emotional distance. I had dismissed them as work stress. He had been building a whole other life, brick by brick, using my bricks. Confrontation felt inevitable, yet terrifying. What would I say? What would he do? Deny it? Lie? Gaslight? Part of me, a small, wounded part, still clung to the hope that there was a misunderstanding, a rational explanation. But the documents were irrefutable. The address, his car there. There was no misunderstanding. There was only deliberate deceit. The rising challenges began when I received the first formal letter from the bank. It wasn't addressed to me personally, but to the corporate entity, my agency. It was a standard notification, a formality. But it referenced the guaranteed loan, the property address, the other woman's name. It was a cold, official confirmation that my business was now legally tied to his infidelity. It felt like a physical violation. I still hadn't confronted him. I needed to understand the full extent of the legal exposure first. I engaged the lawyer more formally, providing copies of the documents. Her initial assessment was grim. Corporate guarantees were binding. Spousal consent wasn't always required for a business transaction, especially if the business structure allowed him certain signing authorities, which, as my husband and a named officer on some paperwork, he had cleverly ensured he did, using my trust against me. The bank had a legitimate claim against my business if the primary borrower failed to pay. The next few weeks were a living hell. The tension at home was a palpable third presence in the room. We moved through our routines like strangers, polite, distant. He seemed oblivious, or perhaps just arrogant in his belief that his secrets were safe. I watched him, this man I had built a life with, and saw a stranger. A calculated, selfish stranger. Every interaction felt like a performance. I smiled when required, made small talk, all while my mind was a whirlwind of legal terms, financial risks, and a burning sense of injustice. The deeper crisis hit when the bank's letters became less formal and more demanding. There were late payments on the mistress's mortgage. Minor at first, then accumulating. My lawyer explained the process. Defaults triggered notices. Notices escalated to demands. Demands could lead to foreclosure on the property and, crucially, a call on the corporate guarantee. My business assets, the cash reserves, the receivables, potentially even the physical assets like computers and office equipment, could be seized to cover the debt. All because he wanted to buy his mistress a house and didn't want to risk his own assets. I wasn't sleeping at all now. My work suffered. My team noticed, asking if I was okay. I mumbled excuses about stress, deadlines. The weight of the secret, the fear for my business, the agony of the betrayal, it was crushing me. I felt like a caged animal, pacing back and forth, seeing no way out. My husband, meanwhile, continued his double life, seemingly unaware that the consequences were rapidly approaching, not just for him, but for me, for everything I had built. He was so consumed by his own deception, his own careful compartmentalization, that he missed the storm gathering on the horizon. He thought he was so clever, using my business as an anonymous shield, a resource he could tap without personal risk. He never imagined I would find out. He never imagined I would fight back. He never imagined I would turn his own weapon against him. Everything felt lost. The bank was now threatening accelerated foreclosure if the arrearages weren't paid immediately. The amount wasn't huge in the grand scheme of the mortgage, but it was enough to trigger the clauses that brought my business into the line of fire. My lawyer outlined the options, none of them good. I could pay the arrearages myself, essentially paying for his mistress's house out of my business funds, unthinkable, morally and financially. I could try to legally challenge the validity of the guarantee. Difficult, time-consuming, expensive, and uncertain, as my signature might be forged or, more likely, obtained under false pretenses which are hard to prove. Or I could brace myself for the bank to come after my company assets. The thought made me physically ill. Years of blood, sweat, and tears gone. Because of his selfishness, his deceit. One night, sitting alone in my dark living room, the house silent except for the hum of the refrigerator, a stark contrast to the steady hum of my former life. It hit me. A moment of absolute, icy clarity. I wasn't just a victim in this story. I was a variable. He thought he had trapped me, trapped my business, while leaving himself untouchable. He had used the system, the legal framework of corporate guarantees and spousal trust, to his advantage. But systems could be navigated. Rules could be used by more than one player. My lawyer had mentioned something in passing, a technicality about how banks pursue debt when multiple parties are involved, especially when there are questions of fraud or misrepresentation in obtaining the guarantee. She'd focused on defending my business, on proving the guarantee was invalid. But what if I didn't fight the guarantee? What if I accepted it and let it play out, but controlled the narrative? What if I used his own actions, his lies, his legal entanglements, to direct the bank's focus not towards my business, but towards him? He had assets. Significant ones. His salary, his investments, his stake in his own company. He had meticulously shielded these from potential personal liability in many ways, but perhaps not from the fallout of a fraudulent corporate guarantee when triggered by a bank already involved in foreclosure. He thought my business was the easy target. What if I made him the easier, more logical target for the bank to pursue? This was the midpoint shift. The moment the switch flipped from despair to cold calculation. I wasn't crying anymore. I wasn't pleading, even internally. I was thinking. Strategizing. I saw the legal framework not as a cage, but as a weapon. He had forged the weapon using my trust. Now I would pick it up and aim it where it would do the most damage to the person who deserved it. Him. The decision solidified over the next few days. It was a high-stakes gamble, requiring precise timing and absolute nerve. I stopped communicating with my husband about the bank letters, feigning ignorance or dismissing them as minor issues he was handling. I continued researching, talking to my lawyer in hushed tones, exploring the intricate dance of corporate and personal liability, fraudulent inducement, and lender liability. We found the angle. Not challenging the guarantee directly, but highlighting the fraudulent circumstances under which it was obtained. Not to invalidate it and make the bank lose money, they wouldn't like that, but to show the bank that the true party responsible, the one who committed the deceit and had other significant assets, was him. My lawyer was hesitant at first. This wasn't the standard defense playbook. It involved actively engaging with the bank, presenting them with evidence of his fraud, and essentially making a case that pursuing him and his assets was a cleaner, faster, and more legally sound path for them than getting tangled in litigation over my business guarantee. It was about redirecting the predator. The turning point was signing the retainer agreement with my lawyer for this specific, aggressive strategy. It was expensive. It was risky. It felt like stepping onto a narrow ledge over a chasm. But there was no going back. The idea of losing my business, the core of my identity, to pay for his mistress's house was unendurable. The idea of him getting away with it, his life sailing smoothly on the wreckage of mine, was even worse. The cold anger I had felt gave way to a quiet, relentless determination. I would not be his victim. I would be the architect of the consequences he so richly deserved. My hands didn't shake when I signed the papers. They were steady, purposeful, like a surgeon's before a difficult operation. The next few weeks were a blur of quiet, intense activity. Gathering evidence. Not just the mortgage documents, but emails, texts, travel records obtained discreetly. Anything that documented his movements, his communications with the mistress, the timeline of his deceit. We built a case, a parallel narrative to the bank's foreclosure process, detailing his fraudulent procurement of the guarantee using my business as a shield. We presented this information to the bank, not with defiance, but with cooperation. We weren't fighting them. We were helping them understand the true nature of the default and the most efficient path to recovering their money. We painted a clear picture. The primary borrower, the mistress, was defaulting, the corporate guarantor, my business, was fraudulently procured by a third party, my husband, and that third party had significant assets, his company, his investments, that were a more direct and legally sound target for the bank's recovery efforts, especially given the fraud involved. We leveraged every piece of financial information I had about him, Every detail of his own corporate structure I was privy to as his wife. Every asset I knew he possessed. My lawyer, a sharp, seasoned litigator, used this information like scalpels, highlighting potential legal vulnerabilities for him if the bank pursued my business guarantee without acknowledging the underlying fraud he committed. She argued that pursuing his assets, including his stake in his company or the company itself if structured correctly, would be a cleaner recovery, avoiding lengthy litigation with me over the guarantee's validity while simultaneously holding the truly culpable party accountable. The bank, faced with the choice between a potentially messy legal battle with me over a guarantee obtained under fraudulent pretenses and a potentially more straightforward path to seizing assets belonging to the individual who orchestrated the fraud and had substantial wealth, began to shift their focus. They weren't interested in justice. They were interested in recovering their money with the least amount of hassle. We showed them that hassle lay in pursuing me. We showed them efficiency lay in pursuing him. The climax wasn't a courtroom showdown. It was more clinical, more financial, more precise. It was the legal gears turning, slow and inexorable. The bank, having reviewed our presentation and conducted their own assessment of the situation and his assets, made their decision. They initiated legal proceedings not just against the primary borrower and the corporate guarantor, my business, but specifically against him personally and against his corporate entity, citing the fraudulent nature of the guarantee procurement and bundling it with other potential liabilities or cross-collateralizations they uncovered in their deeper dive into his finances. I knew it was coming. My lawyer had prepared me. We had navigated the legal process carefully, ensuring that while my business was still technically a party to the action initially, the bank's primary recovery strategy, the one they were actively pursuing, was directed squarely at his assets, particularly his ownership stake and, eventually, the operational assets of his company. He, however, remained in the dark about the specifics of my strategy. He knew the bank was involved due to the Mistress's default, he knew my business was supposedly exposed, but he thought I was either paralyzed by fear or meekly trying to negotiate with the bank. He never suspected I was actively, coldly, steering the bank's wrath directly towards him. The day it happened, the day his world imploded, started like any other. I was at my office reviewing contracts.
My phone was silent.
The only sound was the gentle hum of the air conditioning and the tapping of keyboards. And then the call came. Not to me, but to his office. I wasn't there, but I heard about it later, in vivid, satisfying detail. The bank's legal team, along with court-appointed receivers, showed up at his company's headquarters. They arrived with paperwork, with authority, with the intent to seize operational control and assets. His company, the place he built his identity around, the source of his pride and wealth, was being taken by the bank. They were executing on the judgments related to the fraudulently procured guarantee, among other things our investigation had likely highlighted. They weren't going after my small agency's receivables. They were taking his company. He was in a meeting. His assistant interrupted, pale and flustered. He took the call, his expression shifting from annoyed impatience to stunned disbelief. I wasn't there, but I could picture it perfectly. The color draining from his face. The papers slipping from his fingers. The dawning horror as he realized the trap had sprung, and he was inside it.
Not me.
Him. Then came the sound I had heard from the hallway in the opening moment. The shout. Low and confused at first, rising quickly to a roar of pure, animalistic rage and despair. He screamed. He screamed denial, obscenities, accusations. He screamed as his executives watched, as the bank representatives stood calmly, asserting their legal right to take control. He screamed the sound of a man completely blindsided, a man whose carefully constructed world had just been demolished by the very mechanism he thought he had manipulated safely from a distance. He had used my business as collateral, believing it was a consequence I would bear alone if things went wrong. He never, ever, anticipated that his own actions would lead the bank to dismantle his empire. He had been so focused on the small house he was buying for his mistress with my business's security, he missed the fact that his entire corporate tower was vulnerable. The screaming went on for a long time. It was the sound of absolute defeat, of shattered arrogance. I didn't hear it directly, not the full, raw torrent, but the echo I heard from a hallway, the description from those who witnessed it, filled in the blanks. He had screamed because he had lost everything he truly valued, not me, not our marriage, but his status, his power, his company, his money. He had gambled, using my life's work as his chip, and the table had been turned, taking everything he had put on his side. He thought he was playing checkers, I had been playing chess. And I had just checkmated him with his own pieces. The aftermath wasn't a moment of ecstatic celebration. There was no dancing on the ruins. Just quiet. Exhaustion. The screaming stopped eventually, replaced by the sterile voices of lawyers and accountants handling the transfer of assets. My business was safe. The bank, having seized his company and other assets, was satisfied their debt was covered. The action against my agency was dropped, rendered unnecessary by their successful recovery from him. My company, the entity he had tried to use and discard, remained standing. His company was gone, dissolved, absorbed, its assets liquidated to cover the debts, including the mistress's mortgage. I never heard what happened to her or the house directly, but I knew the bank wouldn't hesitate. The house would be sold, the mistress left to face her own consequences, undoubtedly abandoned by the man who had promised her a secured future built on lies and stolen guarantees. The legal process unwound slowly, leaving a trail of paper and silence. He tried to fight back, of course. Accusations flew, against me, against the bank, against my lawyer. He claimed I had colluded, that it was a conspiracy. But the evidence was clear. He had procured the guarantee under false pretenses. He had lied. He had put my business at risk. I hadn't done anything illegal. I had simply presented the facts to the bank and let the legal and financial consequences of his actions unfold as the system dictated, once properly informed. I hadn't destroyed his company. His own deceit had. I had just ensured that the destruction didn't land on me. Our marriage ended, not with a dramatic confrontation. The real one had happened in his office, with the bank representatives as witnesses, but with a sterile, efficient divorce based on the legal realities. There was little left to fight over in terms of joint assets. What hadn't been seized by the bank was divided with surprising ease. He was a broken man, his arrogance shattered, his wealth and status evaporated. He looked older, smaller. The charm was gone, replaced by a bitter, hollowed-out look. There was no triumph in seeing him like that. Just emptiness. A profound sadness for the years lost, the trust that was obliterated, the life that was a lie. I had protected what was mine. I had ensured justice of a sort was served, the kind that comes with legal documents and asset seizures. But the cost was immense. The naive woman who had trusted her husband implicitly was gone, replaced by someone harder, colder, forever marked by the betrayal. My business thrived in the aftermath, stronger than ever. The crisis had forced me to examine every vulnerability, tighten every procedure. My team rallied around me, though they never knew the full, ugly truth. They only saw my resolve, my focus. I poured myself back into work, into the creative energy, into the tangible act of building something real and honest. The hum returned, different this time. Less comfortable, perhaps, but more resilient. It was the sound of survival, of defiance. The mahogany-paneled office, the scene of the final, audible collapse of his world, is now empty. His nameplate is gone. It belongs to the bank now, part of the liquidated assets. The silence there is no longer pregnant with impending doom, but just silent. A monument to a life built on deceit that crumbled under the weight of its own lies. The paper trail. It led the bank to him.
It protected me.
It's a reminder that in the end, cold facts and legal structures can be more powerful than emotions, more devastating than any confrontation. He thought he could weaponize my trust and my work against me. He learned, screamingly, that the weapons he forged could be turned back on himself. My hands are steady now, permanently. They don't shake with fear or rage. They are simply capable. Capable of building, capable of protecting, capable, if necessary, of dismantling. The scars are there, etched into my understanding of the world, into my capacity for trust.
But my business stands.
My life, though different, is mine again. If you've ever felt the weight of betrayal, felt like everything you've built is threatened, I'd love to hear your version. Drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is. Thanks for being here. Subscribing helps bring more of these to life.